Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a truly captivating puzzle proposed by a unique historical text. Have you ever wondered if an oral history of the Genesis story, the creation, the fall of mankind, the flood, might actually exist entirely outside the biblical record? And we aren't just talking about scattered fragments here. We're talking about a history carefully preserved in the very foundation of one of the world's oldest written languages. So this brings us to the central mystery our source presents today. Did early humanity carry a shared, incredibly accurate oral history before written language was even standardized? And more specifically, did the ancient Chinese encode this exact history into their calligraphy thousands of years ago? It's kind of like a massive linguistic detective story, and we're going to walk through exactly how the author pieces this argument together. To wrap our heads around the source's claim, we really have to look at the timeline it proposes first. There's a massive chronological gap to consider. The author points out that Moses is popularly given credit for writing the Hebrew Genesis account roughly 700 to 1,000 years after the events we're talking about. However, the text claims that Chinese civilization actually originated from a migration out of Mesopotamia around 2500 BC. Now that aligns directly with the biblical dispersion at the Tower of Babel. The working hypothesis here is that these early people migrated with newly acquired spoken languages, sure, but crucially, they carried with them a perfectly accurate oral history spanning all the way back to the beginning of time.
Section 1. Anatomy of an ideogram.
Okay, so let's dive into the concept of the ideogram. Primitive written languages started with simple pictographs, right? Basic drawings of objects. But the source points out a major limitation with that. How do you express a totally abstract concept using only simple pictures? Well, according to the text, the ancient Chinese solution was to combine these primitive graphic symbols in meaningful ways to convey complex ideas. These are called ideograms. But here's the catch. For these picture stories to actually be understood by the general population, they had to be based on common knowledge. The author argues it would be entirely natural to use the widely known oral histories of humanity's ancient beginnings as the blueprint for these new written characters. Section 2. Deconstructing the devil. Let's put on our linguistic detective hats for a second. The author attempts to illustrate exactly what an ideogram is by translating the historic encounter with the devil in the Garden of Eden into written characters. The source claims that the very first historic moment of temptation was so foundational to human oral tradition that the ancient Chinese actually used it to graphically depict their word for devil. So let's look at how this builds mathematically step by step. The source identifies 3 primitive pictographs used to pull this off. Step 1, we have the symbol for a garden or landed property, which represents the Garden of Eden. Step 2 is a symbol representing a man or a son. The text argues this shows the humanoid aspect of the devil, who supposedly spoke as a man to Eve. Step 3 introduces the symbol for secret or private, conveying a clandestine approach. Combine these 3 primitives together and you get step 4, the Chinese character for devil. It's an absolutely fascinating way to look at language construction, literally using an ancient narrative to define an abstract concept of evil. Section 3. The tempter under trees. Now, what's really interesting here is how this framework introduces the character for tempter. We just saw how the text deconstructed devil, but look at how the author claims the inventors of this language expanded on that exact same story to create an entirely new, related word. This brilliantly illustrates the source's stunning conclusion. Step 1 starts with that devil radical we just learned. Step 2 introduces the symbol for cover, and step 3 is the symbol for trees. Place the devil radical under the cover of protecting trees, and you arrive at step 4, the ideographic character for tempter. The author interprets this as a literal visual representation of the devil, camouflaged in the forbidden tree, just waiting for Eve. The author poses a really great rhetorical question in the text. Or were these 6 significant constituent symbols brought together by mere chance? The source is pointing out the sheer mathematical unlikelihood of this. Think about it. You have garden, man, secret, devil, cover, and trees. That's 6 distinct symbols aligning perfectly to parallel the biblical narrative of the fall of man. The author uses this to support the often debated account of the biblical Genesis, suggesting this ancient language acts as a preserved historical record. Section 4. Preserved prehistoric witnesses. At this point, the text pivots a bit to discuss the physical environment that supposedly produced these stories. The author describes a quality-controlled primeval Earth, one that is entirely different from the idyllic landscapes we know today. The text proposes that the ancient world was basically a vast enclosed greenhouse, protected by a globe-encircling water canopy. This canopy allegedly created a perfectly even temperature worldwide, completely eliminating winds and rain as we know them. To back up this bold claim of a drastically different primeval world ending in a universal catastrophe, specifically Noah's flood, the source presents what it considers hard physical evidence. The text points to mammoths, instantaneously frozen with temperate vegetation still undigested in their stomachs. It points to giant hardwood trees, petrified and encased in ice before they could even rot. And it points to massive coal and oil deposits, arguing that these fossil fuels are simply the liquefied and carbonized remnants of a lush globe-encircling biosphere violently buried in a rapid universal upheaval. So the text links these physical fossils in the earth directly with the linguistic fossils in Chinese calligraphy, viewing both as preserved witnesses to a lost world. So, the crucial point we finally arrive at is this. Are we looking at a divine preservation of prehistory encoded right into the very strokes of ancient Chinese calligraphy, standing alongside physical witnesses buried in the earth? Or are these complex character constructions simply a remarkable linguistic coincidence? The source firmly argues that these are surviving extra-biblical records of our earliest origins. It's an incredibly unique lens through which to view ancient history and language. I highly encourage you to look at the shapes of these characters and weigh the source's claims for yourself. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history hidden right in front of us.